colon dash parenthesis is something used in emails. It's called an emoticon. And a colon immediately followed by a dash, immediately followed by a parenthesis, looks like a face tipped over on its side, where the colon are the two dots of the eyes, and the dash is the nose, and the parenthesis is a mouth. Either, if it's a right parenthesis, it's a smiley mouth, and you get a smiley face, or people use the left parenthesis if they want to say that something is sad. So I think that I was interested in that emotion has become so excluded from contemporary discourse that it's reappeared like this ghostly figure in punctuation marks, where we can't emote in writing, but it's been relegated to typography. The book involves itself with the representation of emotion. Ever since something like Shelley's "I fall upon the thorns of life, I bleed," traditional poetry had been associated with emotion. I think that this emotional aspect of poetry became somewhat off limits in the 20th century and still extends itself to this day. So that if you were to try to come up with poets of emotion in the 20th century, you might name someone like Sylvia Plath, or Anne Sexton, or even Sharon Olds, all of whom happen to be women. So at the same time, I think that the exclusion of emotion is part of the tough male identity that doesn't have anything to do with emotion. So I guess I tried to reclaim some of that emotional territory and explore it. I think the business of opacity really speaks to me, and that I've probably always been looking for a way of putting down some of transparency. I think that probably I'm ultimately uncomfortable with the autobiographical aspect of transparency and the autobiographical nature of a lot of New York school poetry, and that what they call constructivism, where you can take language and just shape it on the page, and seemed to resonate with me. Still takes some effort to stay 21st century, but that may be a leavening of the poetry, that it may there may be poems where it actually brings in some accessibility, having a touch of a naive streak. If I were completely jaded, self-conscious, intentional poet, there's a certain kind of poetry that's bred from that. But it's not that I'm suggesting that I'm a hybrid poet, because I think that's also become something of a dirty word, despite the anthologies that have come out recently. But it may allow me to try to add a human touch, and that I completely forget about the reader. The romantic subject was a heroic subject. Its very existence is a triumph over forces and hardships, like the Industrial Revolution. The I that I use is more of a pathetic subject that's overcome by some sort of recurrent ordeal that you never find out what it is. Despite the antipathy toward the I in contemporary poetry, I don't think I've seen a single poet who doesn't use the word at some point. So it's taboo, but it's not banned completely. And once you have a situation like that, where something is forbidden, you have a reaction against it, and you get the return of the repressed. The I that I use is not autobiographical. The things that happened to him have not necessarily happened to me. And once the I is freed of the burden of autobiographical identity, it becomes a plastic, where it becomes like a character, where you can decide what I is going to do and have it do various possible or impossible things. Like he remains hovering in the air when the chair falls out from underneath him. Well, after I wrote Thine Instead Thank, as I said, writing at that point felt like it had reached an impasse for me. I didn't know how to go further along the same line. And I stopped writing for 10 years. It isn't something that's talked about very much by poets, the periods that they don't write. And I did other things. I wrote the horoscope column and did the libretto for the opera American Lit. And at some point decided for some reason that I wanted to write a poem that had something of a Grecian theme to it. I remember that there was a minotaur in it. And when I got up from the desk, there were pages and pages of poetry. I have heard that if you write every day and continue that way continuously, your stylistic changes, any stylistic changes, happen only incrementally, because you're seeing such tight focus by working every day. But if you go for a long period, the same changes happen that would have happened even had you been writing, but it brings you to a very different place stylistically.